Yes,
Have it?
it's recording.
Okay, perfect. All right, well, everyone, welcome to another edition of One Plus One, your place for inconvenient truth telling and myth busting. We are rejoined by one of our first guests, Dimitri Lascaris, who is, forgive me, Dimitri Lascaris, who is running for the leadership of the Green Party of Canada. And we're on very strict time, so we're going to just jump into it and try to get through as many questions as possible. Dimitri, thank you for joining us back on One Plus One.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me, Youri.
An honor to have you. And okay, the first three questions I want to ask you, just answer them very briefly so that we can get to the really big questions I wanted to ask you, because I know that time is limited. First of all, your reflections on Canada getting rejected from from having a seat at the United Nations Security Council.
Well, I think that Canada, through a series of policy blunders and hypocrisies, has alienated enough states in the world over the course of the last 10 or 15 years that it no longer commands sufficient support to win a seat on the UN Security Council. This is the second time in a row this has happened, and it's unprecedented in the history of Canada's participation in the United Nations. And so some of the hypocrisies, we claimed we set very weak climate targets. We are failing miserably to meet those weak climate targets, established at COP21 in Paris. We are constantly supporting regimes with extraordinarily just terrible human rights records. For example, the state of Israel, the Saudi autocracy. We are very aggressively trying to undermine the government of Venezuela through the Lima Group, which includes some of the Western Hemisphere's worst human rights violators, like Colombia, which is the deadliest place on earth for land defenders, the government of Jair Bolsonaro in Brazil, Honduras, which is run by a narco dictator who brazenly stole an election. So all of this reeks of hypocrisy. Very few people take seriously today on the international stage the claim that Canada is interested in a rules-based international order. And I think that, it was inevitable that we were going to lose this because, the gig is up. People know what the Canadian government has actually stood for in international affairs, and it isn't pretty.
And the final thing I just want to say is that even though Canada has never been a force for good in the world, it's always been a partner in crime to the British Empire, now a partner in crime to the Anglo-American Empire, I would say. Stephen Harper, of course, ripped off that mask completely, and Justin Trudeau has continued on with what Eve Engler would call the ugly Canadian policy, or as me and Paul J would say, it should be called the uglier Canadian policy.
Understood and agreed. Yes, it's absolutely true.
And then briefly, if it's possible, Dimitri, can you give us an update on the resistance in Quebec to the extreme ban on religious headgear and symbols that are banned in all public sector workplaces that the Premier Legault, right, of the Coalition Avenue to Quebec, right?
That's right. This was called Bill.
Give us a very brief update on how the resistance to that is doing.
Well, the law has proceeded. He's invoked a provision in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which allows laws. It's called the Notwithstanding Clause, which allows laws that are violative of basic human rights enshrined in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms to be violated for a limited period of time. And so it's very difficult for us to do something about this law from a jurisprudential perspective. There's a lot of opposition in the streets, but it's simply not been able to translate into the defeat of this law at this time. And I think the best way we're going to overcome this law is we're going to have to engage with Quebec, the people of Quebec, in a conversation about how best to ensure the separation of religion and state. That is an entirely legitimate concern that a lot of Quebecers and people outside of Quebec and Canada have. This is just a tremendously misinformed way to go about it. And some of the motivation for this is bigotry, particularly towards Muslims, but not only Muslims. So, I think we have to make the argument
because it
that people.
extends to Sikhs, it extends to
Yes.
to Jewish people who want to wear, sort of the yarmulke and so forth, and
Yes, it impacts all of these communities, and the Jewish community has been very outspoken, and rightly so, in opposing this law. But I think to the extent that there's bigotry behind this, I think that's actually being targeted primarily at the Muslim community in Quebec. But all of these communities are being impacted for sure. And at the end of the day, there are a lot of people who are supporting this law for non-bigoted reasons as well. They just want to ensure the separation of the state and religion. And we need to convince them that this is the wrong way to go about it, that people wearing their own religious symbols in accordance with their own conscience and religious belief in the workplace and in the public sector is in no way, shape, or form the imposition of their religious beliefs or the state's religious belief on the citizenry. It's, in fact, an expression of the wonderful religious diversity we have in this country. This is something we should be celebrating, not trying to suppress. So this is an argument we're going to have to make, and I think ultimately we're going to have to win this in the court of public opinion, because, as I say, the government of Quebec has invoked a provision of the Constitution, which is very, very difficult to overcome.
And the federal government and the federal government, can they not intervene, take Quebec to court that this infringes on people's civil liberties and religious freedom, or is the government afraid of doing that because they're worried that it'll inflame Quebec separatism?
I'm sure that a very important part of the base of the governing Liberal Party is in Quebec. And I would be very surprised if that isn't part of his calculus, that Justin Trudeau is concerned that if he actually does attempt to have this law overturned by the courts, that he's going to alienate a part of his base. Me, if I were the Prime Minister, I would, without hesitation, use all legal means at my disposal to defeat this law. As I say, it would be an uphill battle. But if there's any prospect at all of success, even a limited one, I think the government has an obligation to pursue through the courts a remedy to this situation, because this law ultimately is discriminatory.
That's a perfect segue to this next question. And again, be brief on this one so that we can get into the
Sure.
Green Party race and the
Sure.
and some of the policies you want to champion. So, do you think now Canada has been involved in many solidarity protests with the racist state murder of George Floyd, and it's again reawakens the Native Lives Matter movement, and also even the Black Lives Matter movement in Canada, in speaking out against institutional racism in Canada, which I'm very happy about. And do you think that the latest dust-up between Jagmeet Singh, the leader of the NDP and a member of the Quebec Bloc, who didn't want to support some anti-racist bill and accountability measure that Singh was championing? Apparently, he made some gesture. Singh accused the Quebec Bloc MP of being racist, and he refused, and then he was kicked out of Parliament for that. It was a huge dust-up, and Francois Blanchette, the leader of the Quebec Bloc, demanded that Jagmeet Singh apologize. Thomas Mulcair, the former leader of the NDP, also demanded that Jagmeet Singh apologize, even though whether it was racist what the Quebec Bloc MP did, he certainly was being very indifferent to Jagmeet Singh's anti-racist bill. Singh, regardless of both of our opinions on his leadership, has been subjected to a lot of racial abuse in Quebec and in Quebec and larger Canadian politics. And the fact that this Quebec MP and some of the Quebec Bloc says that there's no institutional racism in Quebec, that's just a Canadian thing, even though they've just passed this very bigoted anti-religious bill, and even though Francois Legault apologized last year to Indigenous Quebecers for the history of institutional racism towards Indigenous Quebecs. Do you think that this has again revealed the ugly side of Quebec nationalism?
Well, I live in Quebec. I'm in Montreal. I don't get the sense there's any more racism or bigotry in this province that there is anywhere around the country, but there is a lot of racism and bigotry in this country. It is true of every single province in Canada that there is institutionalized racism, systemic racism. And I think for us to really appreciate the depth of the problem, we have to understand what racism actually is. There are certain forms of racism that we can all recognize. So, for example, in this very leadership race, there was a horrific moment in a particular town hall that happened a couple of weeks ago where two candidates of color, Annamie Paul and Miriam Haddad, were.
Oh, and we're talking about the Green Party.
Yeah, the Green Party in our own town hall. Now we don't believe that these are members of the party. An investigation was done, but nonetheless, they were saying horrific racist things and misogynist things to these two candidates in the chat box and had to be expelled from the chat. This is just a tiny example of the types of overt racism that we see in this country. But racism goes well beyond sort of these flagrant incidents of hate directed at racial minorities, at women, other marginalized groups. Racism is anything that basically implicitly or explicitly posits that certain lives have less value than other lives. So if you are adopting a set of policies which effectively grant to members of certain groups, ethnic groups, religious groups, less rights, less protection than others, then that's racism, at least if it's race-based. That is racism, okay? Even if you are employing the rhetoric of equality as you do it, even if you yourself don't believe yourself to be a racist as you do it, if the effect is that you are according less value to the lives of certain groups than others, then you are being bigoted, you are being discriminatory, you're being racist. And when you understand racism in this way, what I call implicit racism, then you will see in this country that there's racism all over the halls of power, all over the halls of power. So the government of Canada and the provincial governments, and in some cases, municipal governments, have adopted policies which are clearly disadvantaging the members of certain racial groups over others. So, for example, in municipal policing, in provincial policing, in federal policing, you see that 30+% of the persons who are in our prison system are Indigenous, and they constitute less than 5% of the population. Black persons are grotesquely overrepresented in the prison system as well. Clearly, there is something fundamentally racist about our prison system when these two groups are so overrepresented in the prison population. And even though the people who are enforcing the laws and administering the criminal laws are not employing the language of racism, and even though they are themselves probably very convinced that they themselves are not racist, the impacts, the effects are clear. And this is true in Quebec as well. So any politician in this country, whether he's from the Bloc Québécois or any other party, stands up and says there's no systemic racism in this province or in this country, I mean, the person is either a liar or a fool. It's so obvious that it exists. And I think that right now in this particular period in time, it's getting worse, not better. And the Black Lives Matter movement that you mentioned and the Indigenous Lives Matter movement, these have never gone away. They've always been there. But because of the George Floyd incident, public attention became fixed on what has always been there and is, as I say, probably getting worse. And people have had enough in this country, and every single politician, including every member of the Bloc Québécois, has an obligation to stand up first and foremost and recognize the existence of racism in this country, and then put forward a real platform to tackle this problem. It's time for us to come to grips with the fact that Canadian society has a lot of racism in it, and it extends right up to the halls of power.
Yeah, and couldn't have said it better myself. And onto your leadership bid then. How do you think your campaign has been? How have you assessed the two debates? One which was hosted by Fair Canada and the Green Party of Canada, and the other by TVO's The Agenda with Steve Pelkin. I was really impressed by the civil discourse. It only got testy, I think, once or two times. And and I just also want to say, of course, this isn't the question, but if I was a Green voter or a Canadian voter, and since you guys do rank and choice voting, I think you would be my first choice. And then I'm trying to figure out who would be my second or third choice, but it would be, Amita Kuttner and Miriam Haddad. So just a very brief reflection on how do you think the race your race has been, and in general, just the two debates.
Yeah, so the candidates you mentioned, I have the utmost respect for them. I mean, all the candidates are really wonderful people, well-qualified people. There are significant differences of political opinion amongst us for sure, some very substantive ones. But I think that the qualities of these people is extraordinary. And I haven't seen a race. I don't say this just as a Green. I'm saying this honestly as a Canadian citizen. I have not seen a leadership race with such a qualified and wonderful group of candidates, frankly, in my lifetime. I think it's extraordinary that the Green Party has this many good people running to be the leader of the party. And I think that the way we've conducted this has been, by and large, it has remained, with some minor exceptions, has remained at a level of civility and mutual respect that is unparalleled in Canadian politics. For me personally, I think the campaign is going extremely well. I was one of the last candidates to enter the race. We did not do, money is certainly not the only measure of success in a campaign, but it is a significant measure of success in a campaign. We did not do any fundraising until June 2nd because we entered into an agreement with four of the 9 leadership candidates not to fundraise during the confinement pandemic. We didn't feel comfortable going out and asking people for money. I was the last person in that agreement to exit the agreement. So on June 2nd, we actually began fundraising. And by July 31st, according to data just released to us by the party, we had the second highest level of fundraising of the 9 candidates. And we were not only second highest in terms of total donations, we had by far the second highest number of donors, which is very important to us. We don't have any polling data, certainly none of a scientific nature, but I can tell you from my personal interactions with people, I'm feeling that there is an extremely positive response, and it's coming not just from the progressive wing of the Green Party base, but it's coming from non-traditional groups, non-traditional supporters of the Green Party. So a lot of people have come to me and said that they have left the NDP, the lifelong members of the New Democratic Party, led by Jagmeet Singh, whom you mentioned, and they've torn up their cards, and for the very first time, they're supporters of the Green Party. I've had people from the progressive wing of the Liberal Party come and join my campaign and doing great work as volunteers on the campaign. I've had people who don't vote at all, who have never been a member of a political party, but who lean to the left, come and say that they're joining our campaign. So we're getting I think, tremendous...
Which was always your hope.
Absolutely.
Stepping into this thing, which was trying to reach out to people who, people thought that Justin Trudeau would have been the progressive thing, and like you said, lifelong members of the NDP who are fed up of being taken for granted, and the party being a diet liberal party.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was at the outset. I said my goal was to unite progressives across this country, and because I don't think we're truly represented in Canada's Parliament. So I'm very happy with the way the campaign is going. We got 2 months to go. I think we still have a lot of work to do because the first place candidate in terms of fundraising is Annamie Paul. Annamie has received a lot of support from the former leader, which I think, to be fair, has had a significant impact on her fundraising numbers. And that's fine. I'm not going to complain about it. I haven't complained about it. I'm going to do my job. We're going to continue to campaign. And I think we're in a great position to win this thing. So I don't deny for a second that there's going to be significant establishment, for a significant opposition from sorry, a little thing popped up in my window I had to get rid of.
Sure, no problem.
There's going to be significant opposition from, the right in this country to my candidacy. And the more we get to the point of decision, and the more I'm perceived to be a candidate who's in a position to win it, I anticipate that the greater the attacks will be from the right of the political spectrum. We've seen this over and over again when with candidates with a strongly progressive platform who are serious about implementing it come forward. So I'm ready for that, and we're going to do our best to overcome it, and I'm feeling really good about our chances.
Okay, now on to the policies. In light of actually, before we get on, actually, I'm going to try to save this one for last if it's possible. Yeah, actually, let's get on to these ones. So, can you explain to a global audience what the movement for pharmacare is in Canada? And it's pretty revolutionary, which does require the nationalization of big pharma and you guys trying to and the government trying to subsidize the cost of the cost of pharmaceuticals. So how would you try to accomplish pharmacare and explain what pharmacare is to an international audience?
The provision of medical services in this country is by and large paid for by the government. We have a national healthcare system, which produces which not only ensures that a good quality healthcare is available to all Canadians, and therefore delivers medical services to a much broader swath of the population than the United States, but it also costs less on a per capita basis than the U.S. privatized medical care system. This is something that Bernie Sanders talked about all the time. He compared Canada and the United States. We not only have far more people covered than the Americans do, but we pay less for healthcare on a per person basis because of the profit motive has been removed from the provision of medical care. The problem is that it's not extended to pharmaceutical products that are necessary for medical treatment and for proper healthcare. So pharmacare is simply, in very simple terms, it's a state guarantee of the provision of essential pharmaceutical products on a no-cost basis to the public. Now, it doesn't necessarily entail the nationalization of big pharma. So
Okay.
you can do this, for example, through, first of all, you would engage in bulk buying from the pharmaceutical industry to reduce the costs. And you could in effect legislate the provision of certain medical products at certain low cost. But the fundamental goal of pharmacare is to ensure that people are not having to pay for the pharmaceutical products that they need in order to maintain their health and be in a good condition of health and deal with illness. So that's what pharmacare means. That the cost will be paid by the government, and you will not have to bear that cost yourself as a private citizen. That can be accomplished, in a number of ways. At the end of the day, there's really no justification for making people pay for pharmaceutical products they need while giving them medical services, surgical treatments, for example, and consultations with physicians that they need. These things are all part of a robust healthcare system, and they should be funded by the state.
And if you were to become Green Party leader, you would also try to expand the single-payer health system in Canada to also dental care, which I understand is not free in Canada, right?
That's correct. We would extend it. The Green Party policy is to extend it to low-income Canadians. So dental care would be provided by the state to those persons who are in need. I don't know whether we should be going beyond that. It would be quite expensive to do that, but certainly low-income Canadians should have access to good dental care. And the state should be ensuring that that's the case.
Now, what do you say to all of those right wingers and all those business friendly liberals and business friendly NDPers that look, Dimitri, having a pharmacare system is going to eliminate competition?
Yeah.
To which I would say, why does healthcare, why do pharmaceuticals have to be a for-profit thing? That would be my opinion. But what would you say to them? Because the corporate media, you will get people always saying you're going to eliminate competition. You're going to eliminate competition.
Well, again, you have a highly competitive environment in the United States. It's the profit motive dominates U.S. healthcare, and on a per capita basis, Americans are paying much more for it, even though it isn't universally available. I mean, the profit motive results in healthcare becoming more expensive, not less expensive. And the idea that you cannot have innovation without the profit motive is a complete crock, to be blunt about it. So in Canada, for example, we had a publicly owned pharmaceutical company for decades called Connaught Labs. Connaught Labs and it was sold off, I believe, in the 80s to the private sector by a conservative government. I think it was the government of Brian Mulroney. But Connaught Labs was a cutting-edge, innovative pharmaceutical company that produced extraordinarily important pharmaceutical products in a variety of situations, and it proved over and over again that you didn't have to be motivated by profit in order to be a creator of utility for the public. I mean, the state can and should, and nonprofit organizations can and should routinely produce things that our society needs to advance and to deal with pressing issues. There's no need to introduce the profit motive into the whole process of innovation. We can have plenty of innovation without it. This has been demonstrated time and again. And we produce lower cost outcomes because if you are in it for the profit, then you're going to, price your products as highly as you can, as that you will try to make the market pay as much for the product as the market can bear. So take the profit motive out of it, you're going to reduce the cost, but you'll still maintain a high degree of innovation. And the types of innovation that are going to happen, this is also very important. When you're in it for the money, you're going to invest your research resources, your development resources into the things that are going to make you the most money. But the things that are going to make you the most money aren't necessarily the things that create the greatest public good. So you might, for example, want to focus on a product that has, a pharmaceutical product that has certain aesthetic qualities, but aren't actually producing, enhancing the level of health within our society. But there's something, like, for example, just to give you examples, I'm bald. So you might think, wow, I can make a tremendous amount of money by pouring huge amount of resources into making men's hair grow. Okay. Well, you don't actually need to have hair on your head to have a healthy life. I would be much more concerned to see pharmaceutical companies not putting their billions and billions of dollars, and this has actually happened. Like one pharmaceutical company developed this product called Rogaine, which isn't even particularly effective, I understand, but it was designed to do something which potentially make men's hair grow, which would potentially result in huge profits for the company. Why would we incentivize a company to put billions of dollars into researching that type of a product instead of something to deal with cancer, for example, or to effectively treat diabetes? I mean, this just makes
and
insane.
life-saving drugs, which the poor
absolutely
are deprived of getting.
Absolutely, and we have many drugs which are proven to greatly increase health outcomes, improve health outcomes that are unaffordable to many people in our society. We should be putting our money into that, not into making men's hair grow. So I think, for a whole range of reasons, these arguments that you hear from the right about the negative impacts of, socialized medicine and socialized pharmacare are completely bogus. And history has proven that time and again.
And I've asked you this question before on your live stream, Team Dimitri, but I want to ask you about this again, and which is now, apart from wanting dental care to be merged into a single payer system as well as pharmacare, you actually would like to see mental health care merged with the Canadian single payer system and have the medications that people take for either depression, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder to be part of a pharmacare. And now I know you're definitely going to get like a lot of resistance from from the private mental health care and also the pharmaceutical industry when it comes now. What do you do now? What do you do with the resistance that you'll meet mainly from those industries in taking over the mental and having government take over mental health care, make that part of a single payer system?
Well, again, this is a debate that can easily be won. There's effectively within our healthcare system, we're drawing a false distinction between mental health and quote unquote physical health. The health of a human being is not simply anatomical. Your mental health is an integral part of the health of a human being, and there's absolutely no reason to draw a false distinction between these two things. And what we have in our society basically is people who are able to access mental health, people who have of means, affluent people, able to regularly access mental health professionals, and a great many Canadians who don't have the ability to do that. And so we have, in effect, one system for the affluent and one system for everybody else. I think that's unjust. I think most Canadians would agree that that's unjust. I don't think there's any scientific basis to this false distinction we are drawing between mental health and quote unquote physical health. And so I think this is an argument that can easily be won, and one that appeals to a great many Canadians.
And what do you say to all of those who say that, well, if you take over, if you merge mental health care with an already expensive single payer system on top of the pharmacare, again, you're going to eliminate competition. Don't know why everyone is so obsessed with competition and deficits. This is what I always hear in Canadian political discourse. And then they'll say, and then they'll say that Canadians are already paying astronomical amounts in taxes, and you're just going to further burden the poor.
Yeah. Well, first of all, the competition argument. We have to just tackle head on this whole notion that competition is good. Competition is not good. Competition results in there being winners and losers. Okay, it is a rather ruthless and inhumane concept of organizing a society. Actually, trying to spur and promote competition. I think what we as a society, it's a very basic philosophical difference that I have with these pro-competition advocates. I think what we should be trying to do is to foster a society in which people collaborate and cooperate and work collectively towards the common good. And I happen to think that is more aligned with our natural impulses as human beings. I don't think we are inherently competitive. I think that we have been socialized into being competitive by people who profit from that system, from that way of organizing a society, a hyper-competitive society. So I just disagree fundamentally with the notion that we should be fostering competition at all. And when it comes to the cost, the fact that people are not receiving adequate mental health care has huge costs for our society. Okay, it has costs because ultimately a lot of these people end up becoming homeless. A lot of these people end up becoming unemployed. A lot of them, will ultimately turn to substance abuse. Some of them will engage in domestic abuse, or will allow themselves to become trapped into situations of domestic abuse. All of this has huge costs for our society. It has costs to the conventional healthcare system. It has costs to policing, costs to social services. If we have a healthier society from a mental perspective, then many of these costs are going to be reduced. This is an investment. If you want to look at it that way, purely in terms of economic investment and outcomes, there are many economic benefits, as one defines them narrowly nowadays, to having socialized mental health care. So we have to look at the positive, the ways in which we're going to save money, and the savings will be enormous, I believe, by making mental health care readily accessible to each and every Canadian.
As well as and of course the medication that some people will take for depression, burnout, schizophrenia, and so forth. That'll all be covered. You would in a pharmacare thing if you're able to accomplish that with your partners in parliament, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I think can I squeeze one more question out of you?
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. Well. Then very briefly, going back to the institutional racism that exists in Canada with Indigenous people as well as Black people, and the protests that have been happening in Canada, not just as a response to the murder of George Floyd, but just in general to the fact that Canada itself is an apartheid country to some. So, in light of the issue of police brutality and the calls for defunding the police, what would be your approach? What would be your approach to that? Because I saw you in the debate respond to that question, and take it from there.
So our platform, the first plank of our platform that we rolled out was related to justice reform, reform of the justice system, and we did that because we felt that this was an issue of the moment. There was tremendous there, and it's ongoing, of course. But at that particular moment when I entered the race, there was a tremendous outpouring of support for fundamental reform of our justice system and outrage, not just about the killing of George Floyd, but that's just an example of a terrible trend of racism within our justice system that's existed for decades, centuries even. So we thought it was opportune to come out and take a strong stand right off the bat when I entered this race on justice system reform. And a key part of that is defunding the RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. There is abundant evidence, both statistical and anecdotal, of institutionalized racism within the federal law enforcement agencies, of which the RCMP is the most important. And so I've called in line with what is being demanded by Black Lives Matter Toronto, a 50% reduction in funding for the RCMP over a 5-year period. And the reallocation, it's not just that this money is going to be taken away from the RCMP. We want to reallocate that money to providing to addressing the root causes of behaviors that we call criminal. What are the root causes? The root causes are poverty. The root causes are mental illness that is going untreated, substance abuse, domestic abuse. These are the things that cause people ultimately to engage in behaviors that we have characterized as criminal. And if we were actually dealing with the root causes rather than the symptom of these social injustices is the criminal behavior that the police try to stop and suppress. Well, we're not going to ever bring this conduct to an end, the conduct that we in our society have criminalized, without getting at the causes. So I want to see that money reallocated to the injustices that I just mentioned in order to deal with the problem in a much more effective manner and a much more humane manner. Eventually, if we really as a society are dealing effectively with the root causes of criminality, I believe that criminality will, if not disappear altogether, become virtually non-existent within our society. If we're dealing effectively, if we have significant degrees of criminality, that's an indictment of the way we have organized our society, much more so than an indictment of the individuals who are engaging in this behavior. If we have a socially just society, this behavior will hardly ever happen at all. And frankly, we would possibly not even have need of the police at all. So ultimately, we could get ourselves in a position where we could be talking about abolition of what we call policing today, what we characterize as policing today. How
do you respond to your fellow Green Party rival in the race, Amina Paul? Is that her name?
There's I think you're talking about Enemy Paul.
Enemy Paul. How do you respond to her who says that, yes, we should be involved in social justice, we should completely abolish the racist laws that First Nations people experience and stop and frisking Black people, but there are criminals, there are rapists in society, there are pedophiles in society, and there are serial killers in society in which no amount of socialism is going to make them stop doing whatever crime they're going to commit. So what would you say to that?
Well, again, I'm talking about the long term. I agree that today there is behavior going on that we need, traditional policing to deal with. Absolutely. That's why I'm not calling for abolition of the police. I'm talking about an aspiration. So my platform calls for a 50% reduction in RCMP funding, a reallocation of that to the causes of criminality. But in the longer run, we should be trying to get ourselves in a place where that behavior isn't happening. Of course, if it is happening, then we're going to need to have a properly trained, non-racist police force to deal with it. That's absolutely true. I agree with Anime in that regard. But I don't see any reason why we shouldn't aspire to get to a place where that behavior is eliminated altogether. And if we can't get there, fine. Then we'll have police to the extent necessary to deal with those issues. Okay, so I'm not suggesting we do that today. But I do believe, and maybe I'm an optimist, that we can, as a society, we can organize a society in such a way that kind of behavior virtually disappears. Maybe not entirely, but almost entirely disappears. And so we would have a very, very limited police presence, far less than anything we've experienced in the history of this country. something that would, we may be able to get to a place where police abolition is something that we can safely do. And I would like us to aspire to get there. I see no reason not to try.
And in closing, a lot of the plights that First Nations and Indigenous people across the country experience it can be solved overnight if you actually treat them like like you would any white or multiracial province, and giving them land rights, and actually giving them clean water, and actually truly investing in their educational system, and actually employing through the government social workers which can uplift them, as well as what you and I have been discussing, which is making mental health care a right, and not this sort of apartheid in which a white Canadian and even a black Canadian has a better healthcare system and has much more access to the means of social uplift, social mobility, compared to First Nations people.
Yeah, and I would add one thing to what you said, that also we have to give them a far higher degree of autonomy. So, I think we should to the maximum possible degree, we should empower Indigenous peoples to decide for themselves how to allocate the greatly increased government funding that they deserve after centuries of abuse at the hands of European colonials. So it's not only that we have to provide them the means, we also have to provide them with the freedom to decide how to employ those means for the benefit of their own communities. And if we do that, I have absolutely no doubt that the types of social ills we see within Indigenous communities in this country, which are terrible, will be remediated very, very quickly, and we will finally allow Indigenous peoples to achieve their dignity and to realize their full potential as members of this society.
As John Pilger said about the plight of Aboriginal Australians, and this applies to all Indigenous people, especially in the Five Eyes Alliance, excluding England, is that until we give, nothing will change until we right the wrongs of the bloody past, and until we give them back their nationhood, we can never claim our own. Precisely. I couldn't agree more with John. All righty. Well, on that note, because I did keep you a bit over time, we were joined on this edition of 1+1, our All Canada edition, with Dimitri Lascaris, who is running for the leadership of the Green Party. And when is the leadership race ending and people voting, Dimitri? Towards the end of September. The actual winner will be announced on October 3rd. And if you are a Canadian permanent resident or a citizen of this country, you are eligible. And if you're not a member of the Green Party already, you are eligible to join the party. You can do that by going to my website and hitting the donate button. That'll take you to the sign-up page for the Green Party of Canada. For TeamDimitri.ca, right? Thank you for, yes. It is TeamDimitri.ca. The donate button takes you to the membership page. And for $10, you can become a member for 1 year. You have to do that by September 3rd in order to be eligible to vote. As I said, you don't have to be a citizen. It suffices to be a Canadian permanent resident. And you don't have to be an adult, 14 years or older. You have the right to join and vote. So if you're supportive of my campaign, please, and you are eligible to join, please do so prior to September 3rd. I'd be honored to have your support. And we're gonna need all progressive Canadians. We're need to draw upon all segments of the progressive community in this country in order to win this battle. And folks, our four-time past guest, the great Canadian historian and NGO critic and media critic Eve Engler, endorses Dimitri Lascaris, as does Roger Waters. And so join the Green Party, endorse Dimitri Lascaris. And thank you, Youri. Thank you. So then, Dimitri, thank you so much for joining us, and we hope to be in touch, and best of luck with the rest of the campaign. Thank you. Thank you. Take care. You as well.